Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the SDG Media Zone. And today I have two very powerful young ladies with me here on the podium, and it's a great privilege to introduce to you Trisha Shetty, the CEO of She Says India, and a young leader for the SDGs, and Ms. Nicole Perez, the U.S. Youth Observer to the UN. I'd like to start with Trisha and ask you a couple of questions. Yesterday you made a very powerful speech during the opening of the Youth Forum, in which you said, we have a plan. You said it very emphatically. And so I wanted to ask you, what plan? What is it about this plan that can really make a difference?
I think referring back to the Sustainable Development Goals, I always refer to three things: interdependency, universality, and the premise of leave no one behind. When we talk about interdependency and universality, we have to understand that the goals don't work in silos. The issues are not restricted. The issues of hunger, poverty, gender discrimination are not restricted to specific regions, are not restricted to specific continents. I work in the gender space, and every single country that I've visited and every single space that I am in, be it a temple, be it a train, be it in schools, be it colleges, I've never been in a room where I have looked at a group of women and had a conversation about gender-based violence and not had them, at the end of it, come up to me and say, you know what, I've been sexually abused. So when you talk about issues that are that pervasive, you have to realize that the plan is gender equality, but you can't talk about gender equality without referring to the extreme inequality that every woman is subject to. I'm a lawyer, so we refer to, equality, right to respect, autonomy of a body. That should be fundamental human rights. The SDGs is based on human rights. The targets under gender equality says elimination of violence within homes. So for me, I look at that as the plan. And member states have adopted the SDGs. So then the plan works as a framework, as a template to hold people accountable, to say that this is not an issue that I am facing in silos, and this is where we come together as young people, thanks to social media. Also, sadly, thanks to the issues that we face, it's sad that we are finding solidarity because of the abuse that we are going through. And, it comes from a place of violence, of discrimination, of abuse. And so the plan then becomes, how do we work around it? How do we get people together? Which again goes back to leave no one behind, stresses on the need to always account for the most marginalized, always account for the vulnerable, and say that what more can we do? So I think to summarize, that was what I meant by the SDGs playing a role and all of us contributing to its achievement of it.
But you said that there is this interconnectedness, that inequality plays an important role. Aren't we then finding ourselves in situations where women and people with agency, with a certain power, with a certain voice, are speaking on behalf of those who are poorer? And is that the way to move forward? How can we make sure that everybody is able to speak?
It's interesting that you bring that up, because in September, when I was here during UN General Assembly Week, we had a panel on trying to submit something to the new Secretary General coming in to make sure that we account for the adolescents. But there was not one adolescent in the room. So the first thing for all of us right now, I think, is to truly accept that I come from privilege. Of course I do. But when I'm here, I'm not trying to appropriate or speak on behalf of other people. I am speaking on behalf of the ground realities that I see. I am acutely aware that I come from a place of privilege, but at the same time, I have also been subject to sexual abuse. I've also been subject to sexual violence. So I'm not speaking on behalf of others. I'm speaking my truth. But I'm also amplifying voices of other people who sadly cannot be here. I will not do a disservice to my job. I will not do a disservice to their stories by saying, you know what, if I'm in this space, I will not share their truth. I accept that they cannot be here, perhaps. But what can I do, understanding that I'm in this space right now? How can I talk about the need to criminalize marital rape? I'm not married right now. But should I get married? And I know a lot of women in my country who are married and subject to marital rape. And there is no law that safeguards them. So at this point, I'm choosing to use this opportunity to not speak on behalf of them, but say, this is our reality. There needs to be awareness. There needs to be more conversation. And if that conversation can even have some sort of dent and impact, then I will not apologize for speaking up on this issue.
So what do you find are the biggest challenges in the context where you're doing most of your advocacy, which is in India? Are there particular challenges that you're facing there, and what are the lessons learned for other parts of the planet?
We had a campaign called Right to Pray, where women within the community were revolting against discriminatory practices and saying that it doesn't make sense that a man in a mosque is allowed to enter and touch the tomb, but a woman isn't, and it's un-Quranic. There's nothing in the Quran that prohibits a woman from entering and touching the tomb. Women in Hindu temples were saying that it's not okay for menstruating women to not have access to temples. You're treating us as sexual, like lustful beings. So we started Right to Pray, because our constitution guarantees us equality before law, prohibition of discrimination on the basis of sex, gender. There was a parallel campaign that was started by women in South India that said, ready to wait. And it was so disappointing to see that, and that's what we asked them. It's like, ready to wait for what? You've been waiting, y'all have been waiting. Menstruating women are not allowed to enter, so if you want to wait, but that's a choice you're making. We are talking about our right to enter. So at this point, I feel like the challenge is challenging conservative viewpoints. Challenging, there's a sense of deference that people have to critique on anything to do with religion. Somehow, as someone who's devout religious, they feel that they have the sense of space and entitlement and say, we have blind faith, you cannot question our religion. But I'm not coming from a space of trying to question a religion. But if your religion, if under the guise of your religion, you are going to subjugate women to a lesser life, if under the guise of religion you are going to discriminate against women, then I will challenge that. I will speak to power. So we are right now in a situation, the biggest challenge I face is people using religion, these clerics, and using that to continue with oppressive practices. In India, we still are governed by religious personal laws, which is the big challenge. It is not okay for the status of a woman to be defined by the virtue of the religion she happens to profess. It is not okay that for a Hindu woman who dies intestate, that is without a will, her husband's family gets the property, but for a Hindu man who dies without a will, his family gets the property. It is not okay that men can still engage in triple talaq in my country, and they're getting very innovative about it. They now send triple talaq by speed post, by WhatsApp messages, and every time you speak up, they're like, oh, no, this is an affront to our religion. This is Hindus attacking Muslims, Muslims attacking Hindus. No, we are calling out discrimination as we see it. So for us, that has been a big challenge, to kind of separate religion from state and say, this is discrimination, and don't you dare try and pass it off as anything otherwise, and say that customs and traditions and religions give you blanket provision to suppress women's voices. So,
thank you very much. I'd like to go to Nicole. I mean, we just heard some of these challenges that have to do with possibly tradition, with a conservative point of view. Other challenges have to do with stereotypes, with youth also thinking that they maybe not be able to change things. Now, you are a person that has during your time at University of Florida, I believe, you created incubators for women in Guatemala to develop their own enterprises, and generally throughout your career, you've pushed women to go that extra step to make use of their capacities and to build enterprises. What do you say to young people who feel these issues are too complex? What is it that I can do to change this world?
Yeah, so I think I wanted to start off by saying that it's not easy. And I think a lot of the times in conferences, and especially at the UN, we're always like, youth, like, you can do it, you're leaders of today. But I just want to acknowledge, like, it is not easy. I mean, these are some of the world's toughest challenges that like governments and adults haven't been able to solve. But what I do want to highlight is, and I think a lot of what I try to do as youth observer is highlight the instances where young people are getting out there and they're sticking to the things that they're really passionate about, and they're not taking no for an answer. And I think that was a big learning for me as I was raising, as I was starting business ventures in my university to raise money to invest in female entrepreneurs that were single mothers living in Guatemala City in surrounding a landfill. So it was one of those things where like I constantly faced struggles, constantly faced no's, where if I went somewhere and proposed like, hey, I need help funding these businesses, or hey, I want to partner with you and I want to work with you so that we can find a solution together, a lot of the times I got no's. A lot of the times I got, either it seemed like it seems like such a nebulous / too big of a problem, but if you get enough no's, eventually you will find a yes. You will find somebody, or you will find other young people that are also going to subscribe to this passion that you have as well, that are going to buy into this vision of saying like, hey, we can do something to help people that are living so far away from us, that are living realities that are not at all our realities. And when you find enough young people to do that, your voices are much louder. And then you come back again and you ask again for partnerships, for collaboration, for support to do the work that you really want to do and the work that you're really passionate about. But I do want to emphasize that it's not easy. And even me sitting here, for example, as youth observer, I applied last year and I didn't get it. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to apply again. And I'm going to like double down and I'm going to do more because I want to continue to elevate the voices of young people. And I always mention this to people. I always say, like, I tried last year and I didn't get it. I didn't get this role, but look at me now. I'm here today as a young immigrant Latina representing American voices at the UN. So it often seems impossible, but you just have to stick to it and continue to voice your passions.
I just want to come back to that situation in Guatemala City where you invested yourself for those would be otherwise left behind. I mean, the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs speak about this interconnectedness, which Trisha also mentioned too. How did you experience that interconnectedness in that context?
Yeah, and one thing I want to say is it was very much a huge partnership with people that are on the ground. Like, we weren't there to implement our ideals and implement our belief of what we think is going to make these communities better or rise these communities out of poverty. What we did have to do a lot of is listening, and me and my 3 colleagues that I went with, we partnered with an organization that was in Guatemala City that was a very reputable organization that worked with these women every single day, that provided the children of those women with education, that provided those women with skills that they need to get out of this landfill that they were living around. And I think one of the things, when I went, me and my colleagues, we taught business classes to these women for a summer. And it was interesting to hear about just their general concerns and how similar they were, and their general dreams and the passions that they had, and how connected those are to people that are living in the U.S. and to us that were teaching those business classes and working together with them to come up with ideas. Like, we all want, we all want to have financial independence, and especially for these women in Guatemala City, because they were all single mothers. And they all wanted to provide for their families, which is something that we all can relate to. They all want their kids to go to school. They all want their kids to follow their dreams and find success. And I think those were things that sort of connected us, even though our realities were completely different, even though we, my colleagues didn't speak Spanish, and they were still able to sort of connect with these women in a much higher level. And I think that's what motivated us to say, like, you know what, we're going to come here, and we believe that everybody should have the right to those things, and so we're going to help you even though you're so far away from us, and this isn't the reality that we face.
Great. Now, the 2030 Agenda, I think, it's Trisha, you said it also yesterday in your speech, it has to become a social contract. It has to become something that the people hold their leaders accountable for. And I'd like to ask you this difficult question. How can we make that happen? and what is the role of youth in it? Or maybe you want to start, and then I'd like to hear both of you on this question. What can youth do to make these goals really a contract between the leaders? I mean, they stood here just below us, you know, in the General Assembly Hall. They stood there and made this promise to the people. How can we hold them accountable to this? How can we make sure that this social contract sticks?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that is a question that we're always asking ourselves. And I think it always starts with, one, raising awareness of the goals, launching massive campaigns, partnering with like universities around the country, around different countries, partnering with local nonprofits, because it all really starts at the local level, I feel. And it's once you start getting people aware of the goals, aware of this contract that these leaders make, because a lot of people just aren't aware. They don't know about the SDGs at all. So it starts with raising awareness, whether it's through local organizations, through universities, through here, for example, in the US, I often speak to UN association chapters in college campuses. And I think that has been super helpful because these are groups of young students that their mission is to raise awareness of these goals in their communities, not just in their communities, but also just in surrounding communities that maybe don't have access to some of these chapters or some of these resources. And then I think after that, once you get people aware of that, once you get people passionate and riled up about it, it's a matter of looking to see how you're gonna hold your leaders accountable. And there's so many different ways to do that. And I think new technologies and new innovations are gonna start coming up to sort of help with this. So for example, different apps like Countable, for example, that tells you, hey, Congress, and this is in a US context, but Congress is voting on this issue today. Do you want to call them? Do you want to send them an email? What do you think of this issue? Here are the pros, here are the cons. Here's how this is going to affect you. It's really like presenting information to people so they can be aware and well-informed, and then that's what sort of builds passion, and that's what's going to get someone to call their representative and say, I care about this, you need to be voting for this, you need to be supporting this.
Trisha, on the same question?
I look at it as a step-by-step thing. Again, I have a linear way of thinking about this, so I'm happy to get more input about the same. So from my legal perspective, I look at discriminatory laws, practices, and traditions, right? So speaking of gender equality, coming back to that, in my country, we have something called Section 377, which was repealed, and then they put it back, which says you can get arrested for up to 10 years in jail for having sex that does not lead to procreation. What that does is it's a complete attack against the LGBTQ community, right? It is not okay for anyone to get to dictate what two consenting adults do in their bedrooms. So that, and it gives you 10 years in jail. Whereas the definition of rape has an exception that says no husband can be charged with raping his wife unless she's less than 15 years of age. For raping a woman, your maximum sentence is 7 years. But for consensual sex, it's 10 years. So I look at it as, that is not okay. How do you address that? Step 2, speak to the communities that it affects, right? Women are being raped. It's not like it's a sad reality, but 101 women report being raped every day in my country, and that's just reported statistics. The LGBTQ community will not go back into the closet. They should not have to, and they will not. So engaging with the communities, because change doesn't come by, having this sort of savior complex. It will come, sustainable change comes from when people within the community, one, realize there's awareness that, what, I feel like it's not okay, but I can say it. I feel comfortable enough to say it. So first, giving them conversation, constantly pushing and having conversation about it. Second, providing them access to safe platforms. Third, as you and I, as a straight person, amplifying their voices. And then giving them access to avenues, giving them access to social media skills, connecting them to businesses, connecting them to stakeholders that recognize that purely on the basis of gender equality, purely on the basis of human rights, this is not okay. And what can we do? How can we invest our time? How can we invest in capacity building to ensure that we will empower the people within the community to revolt, to stand up, to speak up, to question? And that will lead to change in laws. We have seen this happen. We have had success stories. And I think it's amazing. Just last week, we had Pride Week, and we had these amazing pictures of people coming forth and protesting and saying, not okay. There's our temples are sadly obsessed with menstruating women. So there was a temple that said, oh, we'll allow women to enter if we can have a machine that will scan and know if a woman is menstruating or not. So young women started a campaign called Happy to Bleed, and they started sending this person sanitary napkins, like stained panties. And they're like, if you're so obsessed with menstruation, here you go, you know? So it comes from within the community. We have, again, going back, because I don't want everything to become urban problems. In rural India, women face extreme violence. We have Kap panchayats that don't speak up, that still allow and ratify violence against women. So these old women wear pink saris. They call themselves the Gulabi Gang sisters. The second they find out that some woman is being sexually abused or beaten up by a husband, they go with sticks and they beat the crap out of the person. I mean, I'm a lawyer. I don't validate physical violence. But what I mean is that works. So people are getting really innovative. I was in Kuwait, and I was speaking to these amazing women, and they were talking about, sometimes they just don't want to fast, but they get questioned for it. So now they have these cool things where they'll be like, I suffer from low glucose, I suffer from this, and they'll eat, they'll be sneaky about it, but they're challenging in their own way, in their own style. So I look at it as, awareness, providing them with safe platforms, amplifying their voices, and then just letting them take it forward. And then making sure that we don't fall back and we don't disappoint them on the progress that we've achieved.
And how do you make the difference that between, the 2030 agenda, the SDGs, all these goals and 169 targets and then very specific issues. You just gave an example of a very concrete, specific issue that has to be addressed. Now, how can you use the 2030 agenda as a whole to help push individual issues? Isn't there a contradiction? When do you go from the complexity of the big agenda to the specificity of a single issue?
How? I cannot talk about gender equality without addressing need for quality education, without addressing need for resilient infrastructure, without addressing need for sanitation, without addressing need for reduced inequalities, without addressing need for climate change. Because sadly, as a woman, we are. First, it's youth who are disproportionately affected. Then you filter it down to women who are even further disproportionately affected. If you belong to a sexual identity that is not heterosexual, you are even further disproportionately affected. So they're all interlinked. So if you don't understand that we cannot talk about gender equality without addressing other things, they don't work in silos. The other side that discriminates against you is very brazen in their attack. They're strategic. They have groups. They have done it for so long. They're so well planned. So from our end, I cannot turn around and say, oh, let's talk about gender equality without addressing these other factors. That would be naive of me to say, we need to reduce violence against women without addressing that streets are not lit, that every public space, you see men in elevators, they'll stand like this, and women are constantly apologizing for their physical space. So there are so many factors to take into account, and if you don't take all of those factors account, you have a very linear perspective. You're not looking at sustainable development. So this is when we need to understand that the issues may truly affect us, but how do you account for sustainable development? How do you account for leave no one behind? And this is when we can look towards the SDGs as an inspiration platform, as opposed to saying, this makes no sense to me. But look at it and be like, you know what? This is a blueprint that I need to follow. There are targets under it. If the targets are too much, let me just look at this as a whole picture. Okay, what more can I do in every aspect? And then look at solving my problem in a holistic fashion, because that, again, goes back to sustainable development.
Thank you, Nicole. You're part of the delegation here of the US to the UN. That's quite an important role. How do you help build that accountability within the US? We just said this agenda is universal. It's not just about developing countries. And anyway, a lot of the issues that Tricia was mentioning also happen in industrialized, in developed countries. So how do you, we hear your voice here in the UN, and that's great. But does the US hear your voice on behalf of the UN?
Yeah, so I think one thing that I have to highlight is it's not only my voice. And if I want to be effective, and if I want the US to listen, and if I want the US to be subscribed to this agenda and to be a proponent of it and to push it in every way, it has to be more than me. It has to be so many other young people that are also pushing for it, that are also advocating on behalf of of these goals and that are advocating on behalf of the importance of the UN. And I think it really does start, and my strategy behind it, starts with getting other young people involved. And it starts with, one, raising awareness, creating campaigns so that everyone sort of becomes aware, so that everybody becomes, feels like they have skin in the game, because once we have that, then we can sort of push up and say, like, hey, government, you need to step in and you need to continue to do this. Because at the end of the day, it's our representatives that they're working for us. And if we're passionate about this, and if we're the ones that are saying, hey, we need to continually think about these issues, look at this agenda, subscribe to it, and make sure that we're pushing for it, then I think, and we have to be loud about it. It can't just be one note. It can't just be retweeting something. It can't just be that. It has to be everything. It has to be all of those things. And I'm a huge, huge fan of social media because I think it scales. It scales a message, but there needs to be more than that too. And it's different components of making sure that we're amplifying messages, that we're amplifying the voices of young people, and that it's eventually reaching the people that are in the decision-making tables, and then convincing them that we need to be in those tables as well.
Nicole, Trisha, thank you so much for your very inspiring participation in this media zone. We have a 2030 agenda, we have SDGs. It's a plan. It has very specific issues. They address discrimination, they address inequalities, and we have to be loud about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.